McLaren has the fastest car on the grid for the biggest part of the season. Still, they weren't able to secure the Drivers' Championship and are at risk of losing the Constructors' one as well during the last race of the season. But that isn't even the worst thing here, as next year, they look to be moving back in the pecking order as their tricks and controversies regarding their car design are being banned by the FIA for next year. Will they even be amongst the top teams next year? So, the FIA intends to strengthen the static testing for all wings. The limit values are currently under discussion. Hardliners advocate for a full prohibition on targeted bending, while others prefer to keep the present quo. And, as you can imagine, McLaren is on the side that wants to keep things as they are, and Red Bull is their biggest enemy in this case. It's possible that the bending wings helped decide the 2024 Constructors' Championship. McLaren was the first to introduce a front wing that intentionally bent backwards under load. Everything was perfectly legal, since both McLarens stayed inside the tolerances during all load testing. The British call this phenomenon Aeroelasticity, which not only reduces drag. McLaren also employed deformation to precisely manage the car's balance. While the front wing maintained full downforce in slow turns, the weight at the front decreased as speed increased. This moved the downward force to the back. This offered the drivers a sturdy back end during the speed turns. Mercedes followed suit, then Ferrari and Haas, and lastly Red Bull, Alpine, and the others. However, not everyone took full advantage of the regulatory gap as McLaren did. It took time before the competition was ready. Ferrari, for example, originally avoided it because they were concerned that the FIA would issue a ban. Then, you've wasted €500,000 of development money on something you're not allowed to use, was their reasoning. However, this did not happen, and the practice of bending was also extended to other components over the course of the season. McLaren was caught off guard in Baku by onboard film, which showed the rear wing flaps bending upwards at the ends when the DRS was closed at 280 km/h, reducing drag. On the Ferrari, the main blade lowered. Under pressure from Red Bull, the FIA issued a warning to the teams that such wing conduct would no longer be accepted. The teams involved had to make changes. It wasn't long until the entire rear wing assembly, including the beam wing, moved rearward on its axis. Red Bull believes it witnessed this at Mercedes and McLaren. The reigning champs sounded the alarm yet again. From the Belgian Grand Prix forward, technical scrutineers utilized onboard cameras to examine the bending of the wings at full speed. The data served as the foundation for future action. In order to resolve the controversy, the FIA appears to have opted to limit the bending feats through tighter load testing. The matter was raised at the Formula One Commission's most recent meeting. Hardliners like Red Bull want the load testing for all wings tightened to the point where targeted bending is no longer conceivable. Others argue that for cost reasons, the wing's elasticity should be frozen at their current level, preventing further increase. However, the limit values are still under question. Everyone wants the FIA to make a quick decision. The wings for the 2025 cars will go into production in January. Nobody wants to create wings that are useless due to budget constraints. A harder approach has a varied impact on each squad. McLaren would presumably suffer the most. Mercedes, Ferrari, Haas, and Alpine would all lose out. Red Bull is most likely one of the benefits. There is no alternative reason for their campaign against the bending wings. At least that is their whole motto. According to them, McLaren failed to follow the rules and jeopardized Red Bull's Constructors' Championship bid with their more than grey rear wing. That is the allegation made by Red Bull technical director Pierre Wache, who targeted McLaren's Mini DRS's rear wing as the team prepares for the Abu Dhabi F1 2024 season finale, hoping to win their first Constructors' Championship since 1998. After a strong start to the season for Red Bull, McLaren emerged as a major danger, to the point that Red Bull will be unable to maintain their Constructors' title this year as McLaren and Ferrari compete for that accolade in Abu Dhabi. And a crucial subplot in the McLaren against Red Bull struggle was the Mini DRS's rear wing, revealed by onboard film of Oscar Piastri's McLaren in Baku, where he won ahead of Ferrari's Charles Leclerc. With the rear wing lower and upper elements observed splitting significantly to reduce drag down the straights, McLaren claimed the rear wing was legal, but proactively volunteered to alter it following discussions with the FIA. However, Vacha is skeptical about the legality of McLaren's rear wing, and with Red Bull out of the Constructors' Championship battle, it's a tough pill to take. Claiming, "What you want is a playing field the same for everybody," as Red Bull play with this playing field, Vacha continued, "I think it's so difficult to develop that I think some grey areas are so attractive as an engineer. When you see the rear wing of McLaren, I'm sorry, but it's more than grey, and they use it for multiple races, because without that, Baku, they will not win. Even our Constructors' Championship will be completely different." But is McLaren's innovation a source of aggravation or interest for Vacha as an engineer? Could we see Red Bull with their own mini DRS next year? He replied, "I don't dismiss that. Just as an engineer, you also have to respect the rules. In terms of technical regulations, the difference compared to sporting regulations is you have to prove that you are legal. When you have a radar camera between 2 points, the police can see you only at these 2 points, and you can go at very high speed between if you don't have average speed checks. The technical regulations are different. You have to prove that you are correct. It's part of the game, but you also have some limits. If the police doesn't see it, doesn't mean it's legal. What happened to Ferrari in the past and everything? That more than the limit. It's frustrating for us when the police doesn't do their job." Ferrari was equally suspicious of the McLaren rear wing, feeling it went beyond the point of blurring the borders between legal and unlawful. "We have to give the responsibility of the scrutineering to the FIA. It's not my job to do it," Ferrari team boss Fred Vasseur explained in Singapore. "They have to do it, and we have to trust them, honestly. I'm not complaining about this. I think it's more than borderline. We all saw the video and the picture of this, and it's a bit frustrating when, if you remember perfectly, the situation in Monza, we had 5 cars in 0.02 of seconds, and you move from P1, P2 to P5, P6 for 0.02 of seconds. In Baku, we arrived 10 laps in a row side by side at turn 1. But you can imagine that we have a bit of frustration. However, Ferrari have had their own bit of development throughout the season as well. In terms of performance, Ferrari has had a lot of different faces this season. During the vital period between Barcelona and the first advance in Zandvoort, it had an average distance of 0.3 from the top. McLaren was already the first car, with an average speed of 1.24.986 versus Ferrari's 1.25.140. The improvements began to pay off at Monza, and it was now on par with McLaren, who, despite the blunders, had solidified its strength and surpassed Red Bull. There was the exception of the crash in Singapore, in a weekend that started badly for the Reds. Nonetheless, the average distance was decreased by more than 70%, with Ferrari achieving an average speed of 1.33120 versus 1.32988 for Andrea Stella's side. Wider gaps reflect Red Bull and Mercedes' mounting troubles, but these teams have also won races against the odds. Vasseur's staff created an experimental floor in Las Vegas that was not meant to be a performance factor for the SF24, but rather a correlation after the tunnel's frontal section enlargement. The edge has been entirely changed, thus the intervention was implemented to correlate the front tyre's wake with the flow downstream of the car. In reality, it did not boost the car's pure speed because the regular floor performs well in slow portions, but it did provide some drivability in the turns that both drivers appreciated. This paved the way for usage in Qatar. Carlos Sainz's answer was good in terms of trust in the car, and the data revealed, as expected, that while the load remained relatively constant, the manner the floor created downforce and reached its peak varied. This translated into more confidence, particularly in the bends above 200 km/h, which in Las Vegas were sparse and not critical to performance. But at Lucé, they were the circuit's dominant parts. For this reason, Ferrari decided to put it on Leclerc's SF24 and test it, verifying what had been observed in America and utilizing it throughout the weekend, taking some measured risks. Ferrari has completed the modification work. There is no possibility of having another X experimental floor model available. In Abu Dhabi, the previously experimental surface will be available again, but there will be no second spare. This is not a small issue, and it poses a considerably bigger risk on the United Arab Emirates circuit, which has far more vital places in terms of escape routes. Furthermore, only turn 3 is especially quick against a series of tight turns. The engineers feel that the standard SF24 should be equally competitive on straights and in medium-slow, non-long corners, with the exception of the T5 and T10, which have a wider radius. The combination of these two reasons leaves space for debate. It would not be unusual if Ferrari technicians chose not to use the special floor, hence avoiding the hazards in Parc Fermé. Given the close battle with McLaren, which has reached the last point, Vasseur emphasizes the importance of executing the weekend flawlessly once more. Daring, certainly, but unlike Qatar, the moment also demands careful attention to avoid regrets. It will be interesting to see who is going to clinch the title. Who are you rooting for, Ferrari or McLaren? And what about those new regulations coming in, effectively banning flexi wings? Will this change up the pecking order for next year? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below.